What is the scariest thing to happen to you when you've been home alone? I was home alone at my dad's while he was working nights, making my dinner and everything. I was probably about 14 or 15 at the time. I was watching TV while my potatoes were cooking when I heard something slam into the front door. I grabbed my pocket knife and check it out. Nothing. About 10 minutes later, I hear another bang on the front door. Repeat, and still nothing. Really freaked me out because we'd had a few houses get broken into on my street. Turns out I didn't put enough holes into my baked potatoes and they exploded in the oven. Was home alone one night and it was close to Halloween in 2015. Loud-ass knock on the front door. I was eating dinner, so I slowly but cautiously go to the front door. Open it up and there is blood all over the front porch and no one there. Kind of freaked out a bit, thought it was a prank. Called the cops because what the hell, you know? They said they would send someone there. They called back and said someone was on a bike and fell and was bleeding bad and was going door to door asking for help. I missed the person, but one of my neighbors helped them out apparently. Crazy. The scariest thing that happened to me I didn't know actually happened until the following day. I lived in an apartment in a not-so-good part of a dangerous city with my boyfriend who worked nights. One day our friend came over and called me to let him in our building in a hurry. Turns out this guy had been crouched by my car in the parking lot and had approached our friend and closed in on him. My friend pulled out a weapon and the guy ran off. Upstairs I noticed that the guy had left a green bundle near my car and assumed he would be back for it. It made me uncomfortable, so I suggested we call the cops. Not 5 minutes after a cop showed up to ask where the guy had gone, SWAT, K9, and about 10 cars showed up and swarmed our area. Turns out the guy had escaped from county the night before with 2 other guys. He was in jail for assault with a deadly weapon and repeated domestic violence offenses. He had climbed the fence in the yard behind our building where our landlord kept his camper, broken into the camper, and stayed there the night before. He had stolen all the electronics out of it as well as a butcher knife and was trying to break into my car before my friend showed up. I had been alone the night before and had taken my dog down to the yard to go to the bathroom. I noticed that the barbed wire on the top of the fence had fallen down, and my dog was nervous. But I brushed it off. The guy had been in the camper watching me the whole time, and I never knew it. Probably pretty lame compared to most stories on here. Was working pretty late, RE 2 a.m., on my computer when I got an alert from my security camera that detected motion. I checked it, and there was a person staring into my apartment window in full view of where I was working. I closed the computer, turned off the lights, and went into the bathroom for a bit. Turns out being extra paranoid when someone is staring into your apartment at 2 a.m. isn't a good combination. I checked the camera memory and the guy was there for 20 minutes, just real casual. Called the cops and the kid ran away and came back an hour later. Haven't seen him since. It was about 8:30 at night and I heard the front door open. I called out from my room asking why my mom and dad were home only a half hour after they left for dinner. I almost shit my pants and straight up jumped out of my bedroom window when a random male voice replied, "What? There's somebody in here?" Turns out it was somebody who got hired to check on one of our neighbor's dogs when they were on vacation and he got the wrong house address, but the raw fear that gripped me when I heard his voice still gives me nightmares. There had been a scratching in my ceiling for a while, and my landlady was dragging her feet over having it looked into. One night, around 2 a.m., the scratching became so bad it woke me up from a dead sleep. I tried to reassure myself that whatever it was couldn't really get through to me, and I would be fine until I could call my landlady the next day and really press the issue. Then some debris fell from my ceiling. Whatever was up there had managed to dig a small hole into my room. I screamed and heard some scurrying away from my approximate location, grabbed any stuff I needed for the next day, got the hell out of there, shut the door tight behind me, and slept on the couch. I called my landlady first thing in the morning and she had someone come while I was at work that day to check it out. A mama raccoon had managed to get her way into the space between the roof and my ceiling and had given birth to a litter of kits. The guy speculated that the kits were getting old enough to start wrestling around and that was likely what led to the hole in my ceiling. Luckily, it was just small, the size of a quarter, so there weren't any angry raccoons hanging out in my room when I got home. They were able to safely trap and release the whole little family, but I still started hunting for new apartments ASAP. I move into my new place on May 1st. When I was younger, my mom left me and my little brother home alone while she ran to the store. I was in middle school, so old enough to be left home safely for an hour, and my bro was only 2 years younger. Mom leaves, and me and my brother are watching TV in the living room, and we see a bunch of smoke from the big bay window facing the front yard shortly after she leaves. We look, and a car has crashed into the ditch that is next to our driveway. I grab the phone and we go out on the porch. I call 911 and give them my address. Then I call my grandma and tell her what happened. Cops and the whole emergency entourage gets there. I go talk to the cops. Mind you, we lived on a state route. It's a 2-lane road, so the entire section of road in front of my house is closed off. My mom rounds the corner of the side road to pull onto the street and sees a ton of cops in our driveway and shutting down the road. 2 fire trucks, at least 2 ambulances, and, as any mom seeing this, freaks out. Note about the road in our house. The road is significantly higher than the ditch, so it is entirely possible to miss the wrecked car, especially when you know you left your kids home alone. They allow her to park in the neighbor's driveway since ours is currently occupied, and we see her sprinting across the yard. The cops intercept her. She sees that me and my brother are okay and is able to calm down enough to talk to the cops. Too long didn't read. Car crashed in our front yard when I was left home alone. Gave Mom a heart attack from all the emergency vehicles surrounding her house when she tried to drive down the road. I was probably 9 years old. My sister was 6. We had a babysitter who was 12, so alone in the sense that no adults were around. Jackass that I was, I squirted bug spray on my sister and she chased me in retaliation. I ran through some French glass doors to get away from her. She went for the knob and missed. Her arm went through one of the glass panes. She cut herself so deep you could see muscle, tendons, and bone. It looked like a shittily cut piece of raw meat, since that's basically what it was. The babysitter held a piece of cloth on my sister's arm until my mom came home, called her right away, and took my sister to the ER. She didn't hit an artery, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was scary as hell at the time. Got 60 stitches out of it. Early teen years. Power went out while I was taking a shower late at night. I got out of the shower already freaked out and looked outside through the window. My house was the only one without power. Stupid teenage brain. This is clearly an attempt on my life. Reality. House had a weird problem where the power would cut out if the water heater and air conditioner happened to turn on the same time. It had never happened to me before that, but my dad assured me that was the problem once he finally came home. It was a hot summer and my parents went to a wedding. I had a project to do and it was like 1 a.m. and silent until a random drunk dude crawled in through my window with a bottle and blush face. I was 20 feet away at my desk from the window and we both just stared at each other. He was flustered and said, "Oh, sorry there, kid, wrong house," and attempts to leave the way he came. He was drunk and dizzy, so I helped him by pushing him out the window. I thoroughly shut it and stared at it for 2 hours until my parents came home. Someone tried to break into my neighbor's house while I was babysitting their kids. I was 15 and I used to babysit for my neighbors down the block. They had a really nice house, 3 floors with a built-in garage under the house that connected to the basement. It was the family's most used entrance of the house and they rarely locked the basement door as long as the garage door was closed. They also had the type of security system where anytime a door opens you heard beep beep beep. After the parents left one night I was putting the kids to bed and I heard the beep beep beep. I yelled out, thinking it was the parents coming back for something, but no one answered. The system on the wall kept reading, "Basement door open." I was freaked out so I called my dad and asked him to come by since he was only a few houses away. When he arrived, he told me to stay in the kitchen while he checked the house, but before he could, we heard the beep 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 again, and then the garage door opened. When we ran to the window to see if the parents were pulling into the driveway, they weren't. Instead, someone in a hoodie was running out of the garage door and into the woods behind the house. My dad ended up calling the cops. I'm still creeped out by it. I was in my basement where the computer was, playing some game, probably RuneScape, and heard someone pull into the driveway, naturally assuming it was my mother who was coming home from work. I heard the screen door open, but when no one opened the lock on the actual door, I started to go upstairs, and I saw a pair of legs go by the window. While the basement was underground, there was about a foot that popped up above ground level and had 2 windows. I go upstairs and see 2 dudes in my backyard looking at the windows and talking about how the door was locked. It was an attempted home robbery. We had been broken into a few times at that point and had everything locked, but 10-year-old me was terrified. Edit. Because you guys keep asking, they just left. Nothing happened. No Home Alone shit. I did not get killed. I am very much alive. Just me and my mom. She got drunk and fell down the stairs. She knocked herself out cold and I had to administer CPR while the paramedics came. She has no recollection of this incident, denies it, and no one else in my family can relate to how scary it is seeing someone almost die and having their life in your hands. I don't know how first responders do it. This just happened last week. I woke up to someone in my house. Walking up the stairs to my bedroom, it was about 1 p.m. and I work 3rd shift, so I was sleeping. In my haste, I didn't grab my bat. I whip open my door and it's my ex-best friend, whom I've blocked on every social media site. She starts yelling at me for not responding to her and how she misses me. I don't know what scared me more. The split second I realized there was an intruder, or that someone I knew would just take it upon themselves to force me to talk to them by trespassing. When I was around 8 or 9, my mom commuted to a major city about an hour or an hour and a half away, so I would bring myself home from school, about 100 meters away, lock the door and watch cartoons or play Neopets until she got home. We lived in apartment blocks, and one day one of the older male people in the apartment lost his wallet, and he figured it must have been me. Keep in mind, I've never stolen anything in my life or had any trouble with the law, and I had no clue what he was talking about. He came and banged on the door so aggressively that I jumped out of my skin and was belligerent, demanding I open the door. I rang Mom, crying, and she jumped on a train to come home, but she was an hour and a half away. She called some friends and they came and got me, and at that stage, he had taken a break and gone back to his apartment, but left his dry cleaning there. When Mom got back, she stormed straight to his door and pounded on it like he had done to our door. He came to the door, all shocked, and she demanded to know why he thought it was appropriate to bang on the door for an hour to scare a little girl. He replied that he thought I stole his wallet. Mom asked him if he still thought I did, and he said no, I found it in the car park. She looked like she wanted to kill him and forced him to apologize. Also, in that same apartment block, there was a hairline fracture on the sliding door that we didn't know about. A strong wind blew and shattered the entire window inwards. I was home alone then too. That was scary as hell. Not super scary, but one time when I was like 11, I was home alone at night and got a call from the local sheriff's office who told me they just had a dropped 911 call from this number, my house landline, and asked if I was okay. I didn't call them. Nobody else was home to call them. I don't know, it just creeped me out a lot. It was spooky movie night at a friend's, and we were 3 movies deep. Just finished watching Dark Skies. I was hungry, so I was like, alright, getting my leftovers. So I went downstairs by myself. When I closed the fridge, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned to see what it was, there was a ghostly white skeletal thing just staring at me from outside the patio, with shimmering hazy lights pulsing behind it. I freaked, dropped my food, and ran up the stairs, nearly in tears, babbling about someone or something in the backyard. Turns out it was just my own reflection mixed with the lights and steam from the hot tub outside, but I've never been so scared in my life. We lived outside a rural town, and my mother always told my father not to leave me home unsupervised because it was a 20-minute drive from town if some accident were to occur. Anyway, my dad was a completely irresponsible parent, and so he ignored that advice and instead left me at home by myself at age 7. However, before he left to go back to a meeting, he explained how to load and cock his 12-gauge shotgun under his bed with buckshot and told me if anyone comes to the door and try to break in, shoot them. Fast forward a couple hours. My mother calls him and asks how everything is going. He says I'm home alone. She loses her mind and rushes out of work to come home and get me. In her rush, she forgets her house keys. So she gets home and starts banging on the front door. I didn't hear her voice at all, so being the obedient child I am, I go into my parents' room, load the gun, and bring it towards the door. I cock it, and I don't know if my mom heard it or what, but she suddenly stopped banging and yelled my name instead. It's probably the only reason she's still alive today. I was really scared before I knew it was her, but I assumed my dad was smart and told me the right thing to do. I was actually at a friend's house when her parents weren't home. We were maybe 10. It was her, my sister, her sisters, and me. We decided to go swimming. There had been a rash of burglaries lately, but mostly garages being broke into. Anyway, we were in the pool when we noticed the kitchen light turn on. It was evening. We assumed her parents were home, so looked in the window to do something stupid to get their attention when we realized we do not know the individual in the house. We hid behind the wall of the pool, above ground, terrified until her parents finally came home. It appeared as though he got spooked as he only ransacked the kitchen and left the garage door wide open when fleeing. I heard gunshots when I was home alone for the first time as a 12-year-old. Turns out my neighbor was a murderer. At least 12 cop cars and like 2 fire trucks showed up, and I thought it was the end of the world. This happened many, many years ago when I was but a youngster. In my suburb, there had recently been a spate of break-and-enters. Where I live, they tend to happen suburb by suburb. Like, one suburb will get hit a bunch, then there'll be nothing for a while. My family had gone away for the weekend, but I had stayed home because I had work. I was up at midnight watching a James Bond movie, Live and Let Die for those playing at home, with all the lights in the house turned off, and I heard a really sudden and strange thud from my kitchen/living area. I instantly knew it was a weird noise. Nothing in the house made any noises like that, so it was immediately suspicious. Just as I was about to get up to go and check it out, I heard it again. That's when I realized it was actually the thudding of the thick glass sliding door from the kitchen to the outdoor patio. As I mentioned, all the lights are off, so I'm making my way through the house turning lights on. When I reached the light switch to turn on the patio light, I hit all of the lights at once, including the light at my front door, which is visible from where I'm now standing. We had those glass panels next to the front door, which I could now also see out of since the light was on. There was nobody at the patio area at this time, but through the glass panels at the front door, I saw someone sprint past and out of the yard. Even though I couldn't see any detail, it was unmistakable to see that it was a person running past. It later occurred to me that they were most likely kicking the glass patio door to try and smash it and break in, as I later learned that is apparently one common method of entry during burglaries. I had initially assumed they were hitting it with something, but a boot would explain the deep, hollow thud of the noise better than striking it with something. Was pretty spooked at the time, just that sudden realization of, that is not a normal noise. Kind of crazy what your intuition knows in moments like that. My parents let me walk home from school alone when I was in 4th grade. In my now adult opinion, that's way too young. So I walk home from school. House is empty till about 5 when my parents get home. So I'm doing my usual routine, Mountain Dew Code Red, Dorito 3Ds, and Toonami on Cartoon Network. So I'm only home for about 3 minutes when I hear a knock at the door. 99% of the time I stay quiet and just wait for whoever to leave. But for whatever reason I actually go to the door and call out, "Who is it?" Stranger dude voice on the other side, "Hey, it's your buddy Mike." I don't have a grown-ass man, buddy Mike. I'm in 4th grade. My shit goes cold, hard in my throat, goosebumps. Cannot move, paralyzed, terrified. Dude says again, "Hey, open the door, we gotta go." And he jingles the handle really hard. Then he knocks again, bam, 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 jiggles the door handle hard again. I'm still like 1 foot away from the door. I actually never moved since all of this started because I didn't want him to hear my footsteps. After a minute of silence, I heard a car door close and him drive away. I'm still freaked out for the next hour, and worst thing was, I was now super paranoid about walking to/from school because obviously he followed me that day and I had no idea I was being tailed. For me, I was 12 years old and my dad was at his girlfriend's house. I went into my room to take a shower. I always put a chair under the door handle in my room because it didn't have a lock. My grandma loved giving me porcelain dolls and she decorated my room with shelves that had porcelain dolls on them. All of the dolls were on their shelves before I got into the shower. When I exited my bathroom, one of the porcelain dolls was 10 feet across the room, face down on the ground. This doll must have flown across the room to have landed where it did. Also, the doll was not broken. Needless to say, my grandma was sad that all of the dolls were packed up and put in the attic for safekeeping. This didn't happen at my regular home, but I work as an EMT and our station is pretty much my second home. It was super late one night and we had just gotten back from a crappy call. We were upstairs getting ready to go to bed when all of a sudden we heard the door open and close downstairs. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else there, so we went to investigate. We went down to the bay, checked all the rigs and rooms. No one was there. As we were getting ready to head back upstairs, the lights, siren, and backup alarms all started going off on the 2 ambulances that were in the bay. Mind you, the battery was turned off on the one and the keys were out of both ignitions. No matter what we tried, we couldn't get them to turn off until about 10 minutes later, when they just shut off on their own. To this day, no one has an explanation for it. Our mechanic can't think of anything that would cause it, so it's a mystery. Our station is known to be haunted. On several occasions I've heard footsteps, had doors open and close, even saw shadow figures at one point, but that definitely takes the cake for scariest thing to happen there. Not completely home alone, it was myself and my younger siblings. I was working late one night and had told my brother and sister that when I got back we could order pizza. I got home at around 23:30 and walked through into the front room where they were sat waiting, both looking pretty confused. They told me they thought I'd already come home because they heard the front door open, followed by me running up to my room. Creepy enough. I had a quick check upstairs, nothing there, so proceeded to order the pizza. Now, I don't fully believe in ghosts. I've always thought that there could be something, but I'm the kind of person who has to have a logical reason for everything. Anyway, we're sat waiting for our food to arrive when one of our 3 dogs sits up with his ears pricked and essentially watches somebody walk into the room and sit in the empty armchair. Then, dog 2 of 3 starts growling, staring at the armchair. Dog 2 of 3 is a rescue and is very wary of people he doesn't know and was acting exactly how he would towards a stranger. Dog 3 then plods into the room, chilled as anything, and goes to jump into his favorite armchair. He gets to it and stops, staring directly at face level as if somebody has sat there. At this point, I'm sure you can imagine we're all freaking out. He just sits beside the chair growling, and he's definitely not comfortable with whatever's sat there. My siblings and I have all frozen. There's a horrible feeling in the room. We're all sat staring at the armchair on edge when the front door opens. My mom had come home early, and the dogs all run through to see her. I don't think I slept properly again in that house. This seemed to have tied in with a few other creepy things which happened, but I won't go into that here. I've posted this before. On June 3rd, I got home from work that morning and did the things that I normally do. I had washed down an Ambien with a beer like normal and then laid down for bed. I had no sooner closed my eyes when I received a phone call. Knowing that only a few people have my number and even fewer of them are set to ring even if my phone is on silent, I answered it and received the worst news of my life. My mother had some type of heart issue and had collapsed. I made the 40-mile trip in right around 20 minutes, with a stop for gas in the middle. The next few days were a whirlwind in which I didn't sleep and barely ate while I waited for my verbally and psychologically abusive mother to die. We took her off of life support and I spent the next 13 hours holding her hand. After the funeral, I found myself sitting at home. I was playing a video game when I began to feel as though someone was pissed and really eye-screwing me from the doorway to the kitchen. An interesting note, my mother was always sitting in her kitchen since she was always sewing. As time passed, the feeling of being stink-eyed intensified until I was shaking. The dog came down from her spot upstairs, walked halfway to the kitchen before turning around and going back. That was when I began to think that I may have fallen asleep and someone had somehow snuck around me. Being a self-defense kind of person, I called out but nobody answered. I did the same thing upstairs with the same result. I returned to my chair and brought up a friend's contact in my phone. At this point, I was beginning to think that I was suffering some type of mental issue and needed to go to the hospital before reality totally broke. I began packing an overnight bag when it occurred to me that I had always been a weird, woo-woo type of person. I made the decision to be really weird for the length of time it took to smoke a cigarette. If the paranoia and fear got worse or stayed the same, then I would make my phone call. I lit the cigarette and walked halfway out to the kitchen and took a deep breath. I'm so very glad that you came. You're welcome any time that you would like to come. However, if this is how you're going to make me feel, then you are no longer welcome. You will have no... Thus I continued with a fairly standard license to depart that is commonly used at the end of spirit work. After this, I sat down in my chair and finished my smoke. By the time I was done, the fear, heaviness, and paranoia had left totally. I spent a few minutes crying, and then left a bit of wine out. This happened about a year and a half ago. My family lives in a house with some acreage down a long gravel driveway. We have a big yard, and the property is lined with trees. One night, I was out with my boyfriend, my parents, my sister, and her boyfriend. My boyfriend and I were living at my parents' house at the time, but we drove separately to go out. My parents had to make a stop on the way home, so I knew they'd probably be home about half an hour after us. BF and I got home around 11 p.m. After going inside, I headed upstairs to change, and my boyfriend went to the downstairs bathroom. Within minutes of us arriving home, the doorbell rang. Like I said, we lived down a long gravel driveway, kind of out in the country, so it was very unusual to get unexpected visitors even during the day, but this was around 11 p.m. I had a bad feeling about it, so I yelled downstairs to my BF and told him not to answer the door and not to walk in front of the door because there's a window right next to it. We both stayed frozen where we were and tried to think who it could be. I looked out an upstairs window to try to see the car in the driveway, but it was parked too far over, so it was blocked from my view. I could only see that its lights were still on. After about 5 to 7 minutes, we heard the person walk back to their car, get in, and drive away. My BF ran to the window next to the door to see the car as it drove away, and said it was a black or dark-colored minivan. We don't know of anyone who drives a dark-colored minivan. I called my parents to ask if they might know who this could have been, but they said they had no idea. We all thought that if it was someone we knew, they would have called or texted us. It was also strange that this person showed up within minutes of my boyfriend and I arriving home. The only explanation I could think of is it could have been a lost pizza delivery driver and the timing was a coincidence. BF said there was no logo on the car, and also 11 p.m. is a little late in our area for pizza delivery. Since we live out in the country, most places close around 9 p.m. At the time, we had never considered a doorbell camera since we had so few visitors, but I bought my dad one a few months later. We never found out who it was. I was living in an apartment in a building complex where apartments were connected via staircases, corridors, etc. I remember I was playing PS4 when I heard a knock at my door. I opened the door and saw 2 police officers asking me if they could come in and ask me a few questions about my neighbor. After letting them in, my eye caught something white in the corridor, 5 to 10 meters next to my door. It was a white sheet covering a dead body, that of my neighbor, and 4 more police officers were standing next to it. The police officers asked me if I knew the guy, but our working hours were different, so I had barely seen him at all. A few hours later, I went outside and asked one of the remaining officers if I should worry. He said they are not treating the incident as something suspicious, aka it was not a murder. My neighbor had a heart attack and died just outside his apartment door, 10 meters from my apartment, as the ambulance crew that he had called were carrying him to the ambulance. Alright, so this thread has about 1,500 comments, so I doubt anyone will ever see this, but this is the first time I've ever talked to anyone about this in over 10 years. So let's go way back to middle school. I can't remember exactly, but my best guess would be that I was like 10 to 12 years old. I was getting abused at home by my father, and I was being bullied at school by the other kids. My mom was the only person who understood that, so she let me fake being sick to stay home from school sometimes just to get a break. Now, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but my childhood house was weird and we all think it was haunted. There would be multiple times when we, everyone who lived there, would hear occasional voices that weren't there. We would just get this feeling that we were being watched. We would randomly start feeling just weird and wrong. I honestly don't have a better way to explain that, but we all felt it. The most common thing, though, was that we would hear footsteps in the hallway and even see the shadows of feet from the gaps under our doors. Like I said, I don't want to say I believe in ghosts, but something about that house just wasn't right. So back to the story. I was getting abused at home and bullied at school particularly hard lately, so I coordinated with my mom that we would fake me being sick so I could get the day home alone to recover/rest. After everyone left and I was home alone, I just felt wrong and uneasy the whole time, but I couldn't explain why. Then later in the day, I'd guess early afternoon around 3 p.m. or so, I start occasionally hearing a footstep or two in the hallway. Now I'm like 10 to 12 and I'm hearing footsteps in my house, so I'm terrified. And I'm not talking faint and quiet footsteps, I'm talking a full-grown man wearing steel-toe boot footsteps. So I'm freaking out at this point and trying to reassure myself. My thinking was, okay, this is scary, but all that's ever happened is this thing has made noise and made us feel weird, so it can't hurt us, right? Then out of nowhere, all of the lights in the house cut off, and all of the toilets in the house flush at the same time. I tried to comfort myself by saying that it was just sensory stuff, but then almost like it read my mind and called my bluff, whatever it was manifested into physical/material action for the first time, so I felt exposed and threatened. So at this point, 10 to 12-year-old me was freaking out. Since the only source of support in my life at the time was my mom, I call her while she's at work and I just start crying and yelling about what's happening and how scared I am. Then inexplicably, after I finish pouring everything out on her and she's finally able to start talking to comfort me, it all stopped. Now I'm 23, so I'm at least twice the age I was when this happened, and I still haven't come up with an explanation for it. The best I can come up with is this. When I was 21, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, type 2. Bipolar mania can sometimes result in psychosis and hallucinations, but that doesn't happen with type 2, and I've never had any problems with those things before. Additionally, bipolar disorder typically develops in your 20s, so the idea that I could have experienced the worst symptoms of my life and actually started hallucinating an entire decade before I was diagnosed is a serious stretch. Like I said, I don't necessarily want to say I believe in ghosts, but this shit was damn near inexplicable,